if we just have to act, right? Okay, I have papers. I have a paper with no name. I have a paper with no name, and it may not belong to any of you, but we'll give the ones I have, and then if somebody didn't get a paper back, although I'm thinking that I've got a name on every paper, so I was missing a few kids yesterday, so maybe they didn't come. Okay, so a couple of people in this class, and if it's you, just chill. But not only in this class, compared two human beings for their simile. That Aeneas is like, and I think it's two of you who shall remain nameless, said Jesus, he was like Jesus as a good leader. And that is a comparison, that's not a simile. That's just an observation. A simile is when we compare two things that are completely unlike in every other way. These are both human beings. Jesus is the Son of God incarnate, but they're both human beings as you're referring to them. So they're just too much alike. Comparing one person to another person is simply a comparison. You know, my aunt is like, I don't know, the Wicked Witch of the West. I don't know. That's still, well, she's not a human being per se. But if you said Aeneas was a good leader like a mother hen caring for the chicks in her charge. You see, now Aeneas doesn't have feathers, Aeneas doesn't have a beak, he does have two legs. This is an alike, but Aeneas and a chicken are enough different that can be a simile. But two human beings, then you're just saying this person is like this person. It's not really a simile. Does that make sense? Okay. For many of you, I took note, you used specific examples. This is always good. Always, always good. If you say Aeneas cared for his men and then you show me from the story, he did this. He did this. Aeneas obeyed the gods. Well, when? What did the gods tell him to do? Show me a specific example. And you see how it's not just me telling you to put this in your paper. It strengthens your argument, right? If you're arguing that, I don't know, Domino's pizza is better than Little Caesars. Okay. Yeah, it's probably true. Okay, so if you just say that, like, well, that's your opinion. But if you can say, on October 5th, we got Little Caesars and it was burnt. And on November, 12th, do you remember they forgot the pepperoni or the sausage was gristly or whatever? And you give me specific examples, I'm like, oh, you know what? You're right. That is better pizza. So when you can be specific, it strengthens your argument in, I'm going to say it, real life conversations and in papers. Sounds like papers aren't real. I didn't want to say it. Okay, so here we go. And I think that paper is not any of you. Matthew, oh, well, we got one for everybody. So, yeah, you were one. Rhett was the other. I did know. Well, because I just looked over them, but I did have other students who do similar things. It's tricky. Obviously, two people's minds went straight to that, and great minds think alike. That's what they say. Did I write something on your paper and you don't know why? It could be I changed a comma. It could be you can't use this word here. I crossed out a word and you don't know why. I capitalized it and you don't know why. Anything like that? Nothing like that? Do you know why? Everything? Okay, yes, Dalton. Sure. Oh, yes.
So I did one from the president.
Yes.
I wondered if that was okay.
That was great. No. Any quote, so Dalton's question was, he quoted, his attention getting opener was a quote. And it was a quote from one of the presidents. And yes, that's okay because obviously that's out in a different time period. Absolutely okay. You're going to assume that everybody reading your paper knows who that president is. And And they're going to focus on the content of the quote, not the fact that, oh, this person didn't live in ancient Rome. That doesn't matter. But no, you're good. That was good. And Dalton, you were the only one who chose to do that out of all the papers I read. So awesome. All right, well, this homeless paper will have to go back to class next week. Go ahead and get your reading questions open. They're on page 47. We are probably going to go a little short today because the story we're telling is not as long. So I brought some fun things. Okay, so, okay, maybe you know what? My page numbers might not be the same as you because I had my husband printed mine at work. Week 23. Yeah, this is week 24, but the homework is always, this is the homework I assigned in week 23. Yeah, Book of the Ancient Romans, chapters 10 and 11. That's what you read for this week? Maybe we read it. Maybe read something else, which is so fine because I'm going to tell you what was in chapters 10 and 11. Anyway, the point of my saying that I brought some fun stuff for the end is so that we can all track with me, like give me 45 minutes to an hour and I will give you half an hour of kind of chill fun. Okay? Okay? All right? Are you with me? Boom. All right. So after, no, let's go back. You can talk when we do our things later. Okay. During the Second Punic War, when Hannibal was raging up and down Italy for a decade or more, he had a problem with his hometown. Do you remember what his problem with his hometown was? What would they not do, Matthew? Yeah, they wouldn't help him. Hey, guys, I am out here fighting for Carthage. Send me some food. Send me some reinforcements. Why not help us? Carthage's like, oh, I don't know. We'll vote on it. And in the meantime, his guys are going hungry, and they've got broken weapons and everything. So he needed help, and he got the bright idea to send a message to the king of Macedonia and say, hey, buddy, you want to help me take down Rome? Then we'll split Italy. Yeah? Okay. So who is this king of Macedonia? Do you remember last November, December, we talked about Alexander the Great and his dad, Philip of Macedon, yes. The Perseus, yes. Well, not at this time. This is during Hannibal's time. Yes, you're right, same guy. But the king was Philip II. Philip I was Alexander the Great's dad. Right? Remember this? Okay. And he became king of Macedonia that had been kind of a podunk nothing country, and he made it great, right? And he conquered Greece, and then he was going to head to Persia, and then he died and sent his son. After Alexander died, do you remember that there was no real one heir? So he divided it up. And a lot of it started to crumble. Eventually it came to be this. One king is the king over Macedonia and part of, they call it Asia. Okay, this is Asia Minor, Turkey today. Another king is the king of Syria. He rules this area. And then we have Egypt. Does that make sense? Because these guys kind of fell, Alexander went all the way to India. But as soon as they left, the people just rebelled. They couldn't really keep hold on it, So it was these three groups. And they would pass this on to their children or their heirs, the rule. So it's this area. So it's not just little Macedonia that he's king over. He's king over this whole area. Philip II. Now this is happening about 100 years after Alexander died. Right? So this system has been in place for a while. And Hannibal sent messengers to him, as I said, and said, you want to join me? We'll split Italy. It'll be awesome. And Philip, I like this plan. So they start sending messages back and forth. But the Romans intercept one of the messengers with the letters on him, and they read the letters. Like, I know what they're up to. So the Romans, while they're fighting Hannibal, start sending embassies and start sending a few troops to Greece, just to make sure Philip doesn't swing that way against him, just to make sure no help gets through. Actually, they did send some help, but it never amounted to much. Philip was never a lot of help to Hannibal. It was a good idea, but the Romans nipped it when they found out what was going on. So this started interactions between Italy and Greece. Does that make sense? For the first time, Italy or Rome is turning its attention towards Greece and paying attention to what's going on over here. Now, when Carthage was obliterated, and I lied to all of you. I have to correct myself. Didn't lie, I was just mistaken. I told you last week that, when they obliterated Carthage and they moved it away from the coast, that then through all the rest of antiquity, then when you went to Carthage, it wasn't the same place. That was not true. I found out, I was reading about it. And the Romans in the 1st century rebuilt Carthage on its original site. So it didn't take them, 150 years after, we will totally burn you to the ground, and but we like that. That's a good spot for a city. We like that spot. So on the coast. So they rebuilt. So the late Roman Carthage was the same place. Apparently the inland Carthage never really took off. Anyway, I led you to believe last week that there was never a city there again ever. That was wrong. But after Carthage was obliterated, Rome inherits all of Carthage's colonies. They have colonies dotted all along the north coast of Africa, in Spain, along the coast here in what's southern France, on the Riviera. Who doesn't want a colony on the French Riviera? That's awesome. This is all Carthage run, but there's no Carthage to run it anymore. Now it's Rome run. And Rome is now master of the Western Mediterranean. What is it, Jesse? That's a really good question. I have a feeling that the people found out when Roman troops marched up and said, "You're under new management." I don't know. A lot of these towns, Jesse, may have already been friendly to Rome. Maybe they didn't like the way Carthage was running things. And I already told you that there were cities in Spain that were allies with Rome. One of them, that's how the Second Punic War started, because the Carthaginians were attacking this Roman town in Spain. But now there's no competition. They own this. So this is all peaceful. We're good. Now we turn our attention this direction. So we went this semester, since January, Rome has founded Rome, taken over Italy, taken over Sicily, fought Carthage, and inherited Carthage's holdings. See how it's spreading. It's getting bigger and bigger. Now, this direction. Okay. Let me read out of Dorothy Mills. Within 50 years of the defeat of Hannibal, Rome was to be mistress of nearly the whole Mediterranean world. In 50 years. 50 years before, she only had Sicily. 50 years later, most of the Mediterranean. How does this happen? Well, I already told you how this happened. Yes, Rhett. Yes. That is a really good observation, Rhett, because up until now, my grandpa was born in 1917, okay? And he died in 2010. And this is not just my grandpa, it's everybody who lived that time. I often thought about what my grandpa saw the first airplanes really being used. I mean, a little bit, World War I, but he saw commercial air travel, electricity in all homes, radio, television, computers, space travel. My grandpa used to tell me stories about plowing. When he was a little boy, they hooked animals up to the plow. And when he died, his farm had multi-million-dollar combines. And so I've often reflected on, wow, that group of people saw more change in the world, than any other, just so fast in 100 years to go from plowing with animals to on the moon. And yes, but Rhett makes a very good point that the people living in that time period would have seen Rome is a local power to Rome rules the entire Mediterranean. And when you put it in that perspective, that one person's lifetime could have seen it, it really makes you think, wow, that's really rapid change.
Probably several thousands of people that didn't. I mean, you only had to be. I don't really know what was it like.
A lot of Roman, in the Middle Ages, not so well, but I often hear about 70, 80-year-old, Romans.
Even like a teenager. Like, you could be a teenager that's one of the first settlers of Rome, and then you're a grandpa, but like still like a little bit fine. It's not like you're like mentally disabled to where you don't know what's happening.
Yes,
They
yes.
extensively see everything that was happening.
Yes. No, it is difficult maybe to live through such change, but maybe exciting. So we talked about how they got control of this in that 50 years. What about this side? Well, there's two problems in the East. First of all, the Romans are still keeping a close eye on Macedonia because they were up to no good with Hannibal. We know they were. And there was another problem, though, and this is the first question I asked you. What was most upsetting to Rome in Antiochus's and Philip's plans to take over Egypt? Let me tell you who these guys were. You mull it over or look on your questions. Antiochus is the king of Syria. Remember I told you 3 kingdoms? 2 of the kingdoms want to get together and take out the third. We'll just take Egypt. We'll split it. There's a lot of we'll take it and split it. Antiochus and Philip say, let's go after Egypt. Let's just take it out. Why does Rome care? What's in Egypt that they care about? What? Trading a little bit, but it has to do with buying something. But it's something pretty important. What? You could make beer out of it. For centuries, Egypt and the region near the Black Sea had supplied the ancient world with grain. And it was essential to the life of a young and growing nation like that of Rome that the trade routes to these places should be open. That's where we get our food. Rome is grown. There are more people living in Rome than they can support just by farming around Rome and bringing the food into the city. They've been shipping food in for a long time. And they ship it from the Black Sea and Egypt. We don't want Macedonia and Syria taking over Egypt. We don't want any interruption because, have you ever thought, this is terrifying, but we saw this a little bit with COVID. But, if there were a disaster that blocked the roads for some reason and semis couldn't get through, the grocery stores would be empty in a couple of weeks.
In Ukraine, how like those refugees, Ukraine is like
Right.
But then when something happened where Russia was closing down all the ports, then you're like, oh, I did not hear that.
And can you imagine the state we'd be in? This is horrifying. I know I'm horrifying you first thing in the morning. If the grocery stores were empty, most of us do not have gardens that can support us if we have gardens at all. We can't do it in the winter anyway. Most of us don't grow massive amounts of food and can it or freeze it or whatever. We would start being hungry very quickly. People would start starving in cities. Yeah, because it works up. I mean, because yes.
I'm out of food, like at the end of the month, I'm finally getting my paycheck, and then no more food.
Yes. It's terrifying.
I was out of groceries.
So this is what Rome is afraid of. Yes, Owen.
My dad does store this, bought this like ceiling thing.
Yes.
And there was a special magazine with it, and then he bought like a lot of beans and stuff, and some vegetables and stuff, and then he seals the bag and he keeps it fresh for like 20 years.
Yeah, this is not a bad idea because you just never know. I mean, I don't think we're having an impending doom. Don't go home and tell your parents to start stockpiling food. But you know, they weren't doing that sort of thing in Rome. They were, I mean, they had granaries, you know what I mean? But there was no climate control, no vacuum seal, nothing to preserve it. Anyway, I think I made my point that Rome does not want anything happening with those shipments because very rapidly they will run out in Rome and people will start starving. They also have another reason to go over there and make sure this doesn't happen. It says, underlying these causes of hostility was the Roman desire to punish Philip for his alliance with Hannibal. You dirty, rotten scoundrel. You're going to mess up our grain supply, and we know you were cavorting with Hannibal. We're going to get you. And they did. They did. Macedonians were utterly defeated, and Philip was forced to acknowledge that he was beaten. All the Greek communities in Europe, these are the peace terms, and Asia, were to be free and independent. Philip was to withdraw his garrisons from those who had been under his rule, and after their evacuation, hand them over to the Romans. All right? So, Rome has two choices. I've just taken out a major player in the East, and I could just move in and run the show. I could be the new overlord. Or I could give them all their freedom. I could let the Greeks be self-ruling again, like they were once upon a time. Now, this just occurs to me. Let me see if you see it. You can see how it would benefit Rome to run everything, like to annex it. How does it benefit Rome to make them free? You would have a friend, Matthias. This is exactly right. If you can have allies on a friendly basis, it's much better than forcing people. Yes. What? To have friendly alliance instead of forcing people at sword point. You are now friends with us. Be friendly. You know, that doesn't ever work. So this is the route they chose. Remember, those Greek cities, they were famous for self-rule, right? Athens, the democracy, electing their own kings. And up until the first Philip, Alexander's dad, they had ruled themselves. And I mean, there was the trouble with Athens ruling people, but in general, they had ruled themselves. And so they went to the Isthmian Games. The Isthmus is the little strip of land that joins the Peloponnese to the rest of Greece, and Corinth is there. And they had, just like the Olympian Games, they had Isthmian Games. Everybody went to the Isthmian Games, and it says, when the spectators had taken their seats, a herald, accompanied by a trumpeter, stepped forward into the middle of the arena, and after a blast from the trumpet had produced silence, made the following announcement. The Senate of Rome and Flaminius their general, having conquered King Philip and the Macedonians, do now decree and ordain that these states shall be free, shall be released from the payment of tribute and shall live under their own laws. Then followed the list of all those states which had been under the sway of Philip. When the herald had finished his proclamation, the feeling of joy was too great for men to take it all in. They hardly ventured to trust their ears and gazed wonderingly at one another as though it were an empty dream. Not trusting their ears, they asked those nearest them how their own interests were affected, and as everyone was eager not only to hear, but also to see the man who had proclaimed their freedom, the herald was recalled and repeated his message. A shout of joy followed it, so loud that it was heard as far as the sea. Yea, we are free. Next question. Why was Greece unable to remain free and stable after the Romans brought peace? Because I already told you last week in 146, Rome took out Corinth and annexed Greece as a province of the Roman Empire. Didn't last. Why not? Even if you didn't write down the answer, I bet you can figure it out. What was the behavior of all the Greek city-states like to each other? Fought all the time. Do you remember? They fought all the time. The Peloponnesian War was the big one. They were always fighting. It was a miracle they could band together to push the Persians out. They almost didn't. If Themistocles hadn't bribed people not to leave and sent bogus messages to the king of Persia to get him to attack before they couldn't work together. So what happens? The Romans say, yay, bye, play nice. And no, instantly, they fight. And who do they call in? Rome, right? You know, so you guys are Corinth and you guys are Thebes. You can't leave it. Okay, that's enough. I'm Rome. I march in. Think about this. When there is trouble, all right, guys, follow me. This is political philosophy. When there is trouble in a country, between two parts of the country, and you call in a third party who may be stronger than both of you to help you settle your dispute, what is very likely going to happen after the dispute has been settled? What's the third party going to do? Yes. Both, yes. They're not going to leave. So, famous story. Those of you who did Middle Ages with me last year in this class might remember King Vortigern of Britain. He was having trouble with the people in Scotland. People in Scotland were called the Picts. And the Picts were invading and they were causing all his problems. And Vortigern turned to the coast, the northern coast, to the Saxons. And he said, hey, Saxons, you guys are awesome fighters. Come help me fight these Picts, will you? And so they sent two guys, Hengist and Horsa.
They were fighting, and then they were like,
yeah, these guys are bozos. And so they start writing home to Uncle Fred and Aunt Sue and saying, pack the bags and come, move to Britain. These guys are chumps and we can take them. And they did. The Saxons invaded England. And this is why they're the Anglo-Saxons. They're not the Britons. They're not the Celts anymore. Angles and Saxons. Why did they come? They were invited. They didn't just come, they were invited originally. So Greece keeps inviting Rome in.
so you make it sound like they
No, not as far as I know. The Saxons? Is that what we're talking about? Yeah. No, I don't think so. So eventually Rome just gets sick and tired of cleaning up their messes. You see, these Greeks can't ever behave. We tried to give them their freedom. Now, did they leave immediately after the Isthmian Games? No, because they were worried about something. Antiochus over here, he's already been up to no good. And we fear he will come to Greece and stir them up to rebel, to fight Rome, fight each other. And they did. So the Romans left garrisons for a while, sort of like after World War II. America has, military bases in Germany, all over. They did this. But they have to keep coming back, clearing up their problems. Finally, when Corinth rebelled and was fighting her neighbors one more time, they just came in and they didn't obliterate Corinth. Corinth is still there. Corinth, you can see the ancient Greek ruins if you visit Corinth. I did not visit Corinth when I was there, but I've seen pictures. So they didn't treat it like they treated Carthage, but they completely put Greece under Roman rule at that point. Same year, 146 BC. So within 50 years, this, and then for good measure, Antiochus keeps causing problems. Let's just take care of him too. And they did. So they aren't quite, so that now we're about the year 146, all right? They're not quite controlling everything you see in yellow here, all right? Britain hasn't happened. Julius Caesar is going to conquer Gaul. Egypt is still run at this point by the Ptolemies, the family that Alexander put in place. But all along the coast here in Asia Minor and Syria, that's Roman. That's Roman by 146 BC. Okay, we did not, you mentioned Perseus and we skipped him. What happened to Perseus and why did it happen? I kind of went past this, but we'll go back and clean it up. Do you know, Matthew, you mentioned Perseus? Oh, okay. You think of Pyrrhus? The General Pyrrhus, okay. Let me find it so I can just read it to you. Okay. Rome was constantly called in to settle their disputes, as I said, and by degrees she became more and more their ruler. This state of affairs lasted until Philip died. He was succeeded by his son Perseus, who for a long time had been looking forward to a day when he would unite Greece and free her from the ever-increasing power of Rome. The Romans opposed this policy, and in consequence, another war broke out with Macedonia. Perseus was defeated and fled. It was the end of Macedonia. The general who came and conquered Perseus was Aemilius Paulus, son of Aemilius Paulus. He's the guy I read about last week during the terrible defeat at Cannae. He was the consul that was sitting on the rock, and the guy rode by on a horse and said, "Get up on my horse. You can fly." He's like, "No, I'm just going to die here with my men. And when you get back, would you please tell Fabius that I tried to follow his advice as much as I was able to delay, to not engage Hannibal." This is this guy's son. Went to Greece. Conquered Macedonia, conquered Perseus. The Macedonian cities were full of treasures, and these were brought by Aemilius to Rome. Statues, pictures, magnificent armor, quantities of gold and silver. This is the influx of Greek art. The Romans were not the greatest artists. They were not very original. They were great builders. They were great engineers. But they liked to copy things, and they had the great talent of seeing what they liked and copying it. And so there are a lot of Greek works of art that we don't have anymore, but we have Roman copies. And we know what the original might have looked like. And so this was the moment when Greek, art just floods into Italy because Greece has fallen. They brought Perseus to Rome, and he was marched through Rome in a triumph. Do you guys know what they mean when they say the Roman general triumphed? I mean, obviously it means he wins, but a triumph is an actual thing. It's a bit like a parade. Yeah, like a really big parade, like Macy's Thanksgiving Day parade. But instead of marching bands, you've got all the army that fought in this campaign marching through with their general. And instead of floats, parade floats, you've got wagons loaded in chariots, loaded down with loot that they have taken from this campaign, piled with statues, and maybe chariots are piled on the wagon, gold-plated chariots, you know what I mean, that the king used to ride in, leading his best horses down. Sometimes there was so much that it went on for several days, not 24 hours a day, but they just had Triumph time, and then they all went home and they came back for Triumph Day Part 2. And then you would lead in chains, tied to the wagons, the prisoners of war. Sometimes there were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these. But usually they just brought the best of the best. They didn't bring everybody. They killed a lot of them. Peasants and people that were impressive marching in the Triumph. But the officials, the bigwigs, if there were any warriors that were particularly tall and good looking and strong looking, they bring them. Like, he'll look good in the Triumph, save him. And so they marched Perseus through the streets of Rome, chained to the wagon with all the spoils of Greece surrounding him. And then usually they execute them or they imprison them. Sometimes, though, they had a foe that the Romans considered really, really honorable. This guy was brave and he fought a good fight. Cut him some slack. He was fighting for his own family. And in that case, they can't let him go home, because he'll stir up trouble. But they don't chain him in a dungeon. Yes, like house arrest or something like that, where he's not living a bad life, but you're not going anywhere and we're going to keep an eye on you for the rest of your life. But you're not going to be in a nasty dungeon with rats. It's going to be comfortable for you because we admire you. I frankly think that's pretty nice. They could just execute all their enemies, but the fact that they always honored a really good foe, unless the foe proved to be just unrepentant and just kept causing trouble, kept stirring up rebellion. Perseus, I think it says that they executed him. I don't know if Dorothy Mills tells us. Well, I don't know. Not if they executed him. I don't know what happened to Perseus. Oh yeah, yeah. They'd take care of you. I mean, you'd have no way to make a living. No, it's not bad. It's not bad. But this was a special case, Jesse. So most of the time, this isn't going to happen. So Rome, in that 50 years, as we talked about, went from we run Sicily to we run the whole Mediterranean world, pretty much. And what they lack of that in the next 200 years, 150 years, they're going to absorb, and it's going to turn into this. Now, there's a problem. When you get bigger, when you have more land to manage, the government they set up in Rome was not set up to manage the world. Set up to manage Rome. And then by the time they threw out their kings and set up the republic, Rome had spread a little bit, but not much. It didn't control all of Italy, even. Oh, you mean rulers in different places or governor? This is exactly what they're going to have to do. Yes. That's very good, Matthias. That is exactly. In fact, states is the example I used yesterday in my class. You can't rule a huge, huge chunk of land from one place without having intermediaries. Our government has states. Now, when they were debating whether or not to adopt the Constitution, some of the writers were really worried about, America is too big. And it was only to the Mississippi River then, but America is too big for a republic. And they said, well, one of the writers said, but we don't know how travel and communication may be improved over time. This was very true because what was a problem then isn't a problem. Just phone call, Zoom call, whatever. We can talk to each other instantly. But in early America, they couldn't. In Rome, they can't. They need somebody on the spot just like the early America needed governors of states. And then it goes down to mayors of towns, right? A hierarchy of rulership so that you can deal with everything. So Rome had to somehow put this in place. They've got to deal with things as soon as they happen. You know, if Syria rebels, how long is it going to take Rome to find out and muster troops and send them, right? So they need somebody who can act immediately. And that's what they did. And they set up, this was in the next chapter, each province was ruled by a Roman magistrate appointed by the Senate, at first called a praetor and later a proconsul. The proconsul was a very independent ruler. And let's just hit our last question before I go into this. Why did residents of Roman provinces often not appreciate their Roman rulers? What do they not like about local Roman rulers? So if you guys aren't, this is my teacher moment. If you guys aren't writing the answers down as you read on your papers, this is why I wrote the questions for you, just so you could sort of remember the reading. It helps us to remember things if we write something down. It's for you. It's for you. I don't check them. It's for you. It says this. Dorothy Mill says, in Rome, each consul had a colleague who had the right to veto his action, did he so wish. But the proconsul in the province had no check on his actions. In Rome, public money could only be expended at the will of the Senate, whereas the taxes paid in a province could be spent as the proconsul chose. Maybe the proconsul would really like a nice house. How am I going to pay for my nice house? Up the taxes. You see?
That's the job I want.
It says, it became a scandal of the time that a governor would go to his province a poor man and return rich. People sometimes, as Rome, we're going to talk about this over the next few weeks, as the Roman government became more corrupt, more bribery, people just paid for a proconsulship. Remember, they are chosen by the Senate. You pay enough people off in the Senate and boom, they choose you to be proconsul of some plum province that's really wealthy. And you go and you just pillage. You just pillage them. Can you see why the provincials don't like this? Does that make sense? This is later. This is about 100 years later, like 50, 60 BC. There was a famous governor of Sicily. Sicily was its own province, Varro. And Varro was notorious. He pillaged, he looted, he had all the great artwork of Sicily, which was Greek, sent back to his house and set up in his garden. Like if you visit Varro's house, it's just decorated with artwork from Sicily because he just stole it. He just stole it. He was punishing people. He was greedy, but he was crucifying Roman citizens. He was, if you had Roman citizenship, there were certain punishments you couldn't be subjected to, and you couldn't be subjected to them without trial. Varro didn't care. And they brought him up on charges because after your proconsulship is done, you can go to trial. They can be prosecuted. Sicily sent people to complain about Varro's behavior, and they took it to court, and nobody wanted to touch this case but a famous orator of the time, kind of up and coming, named Cicero. Like, I'll prosecute Varys. And he did, and won. But Varys was just one of he was the worst case of what a lot of them were, if you know what I mean. It like she said, when you go take a job somewhere that's not, a huge paying job in and of itself, and you go and you don't have much money, and when you come home you have a boatload of money. We know where you got the money. So this is why the provinces hated the Romans. In the book of Acts, Felix is the governor of Judea, And it says in the book of Acts, he left Paul in prison, the Apostle Paul, because he was hoping to get a bribe. No, nobody, it's just, we all know why he's doing it. I don't know why he thought Paul had money on him, or his family had money, but it said, yeah, he left him in prison hoping for a bribe. That's how we run things. So as we head into our discussion of for the temple, you can see why the provinces like Judea hated the Romans. It's just the Judeans had an extra reason to hate them because they felt that the Romans were insulting the true God. Next week, I would like you guys to read. Okay, the instructions are very weird, but it'll make sense when you get into it. Chapter 12, part 1, part 2, and then part 3 has 3 parts, an A, B, and a C. Do you know how sometimes it is in this book? So we're reading parts A and B. So that's what it says in your instructions. Chapter 12, parts 1 through 3, A and B. Also, when you run out of questions to answer, stop reading, because you've probably gotten to the end of the reading. You'll see an A, a 3A, a 3B, and then the next week is the 3C, okay? And just to warn you again, it is, it's only 20, it's 30 pages. It's 30 pages in here this time, so it's a little longer again. Again, there's just no good place to break it. We're going to start looking at, over the next several weeks, how do we get from a republic that's trying to put in place government systems that can rule an empire, how do we get from there to an empire with an emperor? Because it doesn't happen overnight with one person. It happens with a series of events and a series of people. Yes, Jesse, you waited very patiently.
When you said read chapter 11 or chapter 12 parts,
yes.
I thought you were talking about for the temple. And I was like,
oh
my gosh, I read ahead.
Oh, no. We just to throw that in, we will be finishing for the temple this week. 16, it's only 4 chapters this week, because there's only 19 chapters. But before we start talking about for the temple, let's talk about the papers that you're working on. Rhett, would you come up and just unclip my map for me, because you're a tall person? It's so nice to just be able to reach stuff. That's actually why I wanted to do it, because I can pull the map down, but then I leave the clips up there. And once I went home and I left the clips just hanging. So last week, we spent some time brainstorming ideas, responses to the question, should John have formed his own band, his own rebel band? And we came up with a lot of stuff last week together. Did anyone, as you read, come up with anything new? Any observations you made that you would like to share with everybody so everyone can steal it from you and it can help them? Just a second. There were a couple yesterday, and I can't remember what they are, and I didn't write them down. Oh, one of them, somebody mentioned yesterday that it gave John and his men military practice. You know, their goal is to defend the temple. Therefore, the name of the book. And this is going to involve fighting. And so presumably John and his buddies, they're not his buddies, but the locals, had not spent large amounts of their time training and fighting. And this is giving them combat experience that they can use when they head to Jerusalem and they have to fight the Romans full on. So that was one, which if you want to add that to your list, you can. I don't remember the other one, guys. Maybe it'll pop into my head while we're talking. No other idea? Oh, yes. Yeah, when John shows up. Did you read, did John, when you left off reading, had John already arrived in the city? Or not yet? Okay. Then that is a really good observation, because you will see in your reading how he avoids that, because yes, one would think, like, we don't need another one. We don't need another band. We've already divided Jerusalem up between us. Go away and take him in with you. You'll see how he gets around that. This week, I was going to have you organize and write the whole paper, 5 paragraphs this week, and then I decided not to, because you'll write a better paper for me if I give you a little time. Also, I'm asking you to read 30 pages in Dorothy Mills and everything. But here's what I want you to do this week. First step, you can write the steps down if you want to. Choose a side. Do you feel like you have enough information on your list to choose a side? Does everyone feel like you could do that? John should form a band or John should not form a band. Okay. After you've chosen a side, you need to choose 3 broad reasons, large reasons in support of that. Remember our distinction between picking a very minute reason. John needs to form a band because Mary really likes shoes, and the Romans are disrupting the flow of new sandals into Galilee. Okay, stupid thing. Do you see how this is a very, very specific reason? But John should form a band because many people and places he loves are in danger. That's a very big reason. And how can I support that? Well, he's devoted to the temple in Jerusalem. He's got a family with a farm. He's got neighbors, his parents. Do you see what I mean? I can support that there are people and places he loves. I can come up with supporting reasons for that. So I need to choose, probably from the list you have written down that we came up with last week. You need to choose 3 of the biggest reasons you can find. Does everybody, this is kind of the hardest part of this. Does everyone understand what I mean by the biggest reasons? You all did it on your Aeneas is a good leader paper. No one said Aeneas is not a good leader because I'm trying to think of something really specific. Because it's hard to support that with 3 supporting reasons. That's really too specific. But he took care of his men. That's bigger. So do that. Choose 3 big reasons. Yes, Jesse. Did you forget? I'm sorry. You know what? If it comes back, just start saying it. Just start talking. I give you permission. Okay. Next, you need to put them together in an outline. What does your outline look like? It looks like this. First, you're going to have an introduction. We already talked about what goes in an introduction. But you're going to have 3 main paragraphs with reason 1, reason 2, reason 3. And on your outline, you won't just write R1, R2, R3. You'll write the reason you're choosing. And then below it, you'll write 3 supports for that.
What, is it like 3 to 5?
3, yeah, you know what? I don't think you can have too much support. You can only have too little, yes.
I remember a question.
Oh, good.
Does pagans, like if you call someone a pagan, does that necessarily mean they are Christian?
Yes.
Don't have the same religion.
No.
A Muslim call a Christian pagan?
Yes. Okay. It depends on when in history you are. Okay. So I know Christians called Muslims pagans, because I'm thinking of a famous medieval poem where they called them the Paynims, and they mean pagans.
What's the definition?
I think, okay, the definition of pagan is someone who lives in the country. Yeah, it's the Latin word for someone who lives in the country. Why? Because Christianity spread, guys, Christianity spread first in the cities. And it took a while to drift out of the countryside, and the farm people in the countryside remained pagan. And in that case, they were talking about Greek and Roman gods. For them, pagan meant Zeus and Hera and Venus and all that crew, right? But later, pagan starts to mean not Christian. And Jesse, I think that throughout the Middle Ages, they're using it both ways. But when you get into the Middle Ages, Jesse, there aren't really pagans of the first kind left. There's no Zeus worshippers left after a while. So they start applying it to people who aren't Christians. I think today when people say it, they certainly don't mean you're a worshiper of Zeus. But I get the impression, and Jesse, I can't prove this. This is a gut feeling of the way I see it used. I get the feeling that when people say pagan, they don't really mean Hindu or Buddhist or some other organized religion or philosophy. They mean either they have no religion whatsoever, or they are sort of a new age, like they're the new pagans. They're the new sun worshippers, they exist. Kind of trying to revive Greece and Rome. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think there are people that do. They're trying to revive it. Okay, let's move back to our paper, but this is a very interesting question. Okay, does everybody understand my outline? Have we done enough of these? Some of you did these with me last year. You just did one, and of course, then there's going to be a conclusion. But does everybody understand 3 big reasons, and then each one is backed up by 3 smaller reasons? Oh, I've got to see if we can just use the nameless person's paper who's probably watching the video today. He was a good war general. This is one of their large reasons. He did not give tasks that were too complicated or hard. He was a great fighter and gave it his best. He did what was right for him, his people, and the future of Rome. Unfortunately, this paper, I'm sorry if this is you and you're hearing this, is a little vague because there's no specific examples of them doing this. But he or she has picked a big idea and then backed it up with little ones. Okay, do that. Here's what I want you to do. This is important. Pay attention to this part. This is what I want you to get done this week. These 3 things, and start writing. Write at least a couple of your body paragraphs, so you don't have all of the rest of it to write the next week. It's a 2-week. Yes, this is going to be due 2 weeks from today, which I believe is the last day we get together before the second spring break. I think we only have, it's like 5 weeks break, 5 weeks break, 5 weeks. This is week 3. So we have two more. That's what I mean. If it's due in 2 weeks, then that would be the last time. That's what I do with my classes. But okay, anyway. Does everybody follow? You're going to choose a side. You're going to choose your reasons. You're going to outline. This is probably the hardest step, honestly. Because you've got all these reasons and these ideas on your list, and you've got to sort them out. You've got to decide which goes with which. And then start writing. Don't worry about the introduction. Remember, it's much easier to write the body of your paper first. It doesn't have to be neat or anything, because you know you're going to add an introduction. You're going to rewrite the whole thing, right, if you're writing it out. So this is just rough draft. Try to get that far. And then next week, we will talk about, I will remind you what goes in an introduction and a conclusion. But focus on that this week. We are including, as you write, we are including our simile, alliteration, antithesis, and the ing opener. Okay? Are we good? Okay. If you wait, this friendly reminder, Mrs. Ferguson says this isn't due for 2 weeks, so I know she told me to do this, but I'm just not going to do it because 2 weeks from today. So I'm sorry, Matthias, you walked out and you missed the whole what you're supposed to get done this week. Get done the outline and then write at least 2 of your body paragraphs, okay? If you wait, then you've just knocked out the whole reason for me giving you 2 weeks so that you didn't have to work as hard on it in 1 week, and it will be a better paper. And then you'll be rushed and stressed the next week. So don't do that to yourself. You never are benefited in the long term when you put stuff off. Okay, any questions? I feel like I just blabbed and blabbed and blabbed a bunch of stuff. Okay. No, we have to talk about John, but we have almost 40 minutes of class left. And we're not talking about John for 40 minutes. I'm just going to tell you flat out, we're not. There will be time. And I also brought some of that anguished English, some of the dangling participles and modifiers. Okay. I feel like you don't love this book. Okay, there was something I wanted to read out of Josephus last week that I left the flag in because I forgot to tell you guys. Do you remember the part where they rebelled, the Galileans rebelled around the lake, and the Romans chased them onto the lake on the rafts, and everybody was trying to escape on rafts, and it was a massacre on the lake? Josephus tells us about this, and I wanted to read this paragraph because it's awful. Yes.
Is it just me, or is it kind of weird to like read this stuff and be like, this stuff, like we're talking about people that are in the Bible, we don't hear about these things in the Bible, and like we're talking about Jerusalem, but like it's not really mentioned in the Bible because it's like a different time period. Like
It is.
It's just like you're like hear a name like the Galileans, and you're like, oh, cool, but then like you can actually be like, wait, that's the same people that did this, and
It's the same people.
They were part of this.
It is. Of course, I mean, obviously the New Testament, except for Revelation, we're not sure exactly when Revelation was written, but the rest of the New Testament would have been written by this point. Although sometimes they're not sure about Hebrews either. But the writer of Hebrews never mentions that the temple has been destroyed. And you think that would be important. Of course, the writer of Revelation does not mention that the temple has been destroyed, which is huge for Jewish history. But yes, when you realize that this Galilee is the same place that Jesus was walking around. This lake that I'm about to read you about is the same lake where he calmed the storm and walked on the water. Same body of water. Only, 35 years later. Here's Josephus's account of this attack on the Jews fleeing across the lake. When his rafts were ready, Vespasian embarked his troops and ordered them to attack the fugitives. In their small skiffs, the Jews could not cope with the well-armed Romans on the rafts, and merely threw stones at them from a distance, which rattled off their armor. The Romans boarded their vessels or killed them from the rafts with arrows or long lances. If any clung to the side of a raft, their hands or their heads were cut off. The survivors were driven to the shore where they were killed by the Romans lining the beaches so that not a man escaped. The lake was red with blood. The shores strewn with wrecks and swollen carcasses, which in following days polluted the district with a horrible stench. The dead, including the number who had fallen defending the city of Turkey, totaled 6,700. 6,700 dead just on the lake and in the local city. Yes. Okay. Yes. 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 When stuff stink and can you imagine dead bodies? Swollen, wounded, dead bodies just washing up all over the shores. It's horrifying. In your reading this week, G.A. Hinty, talked about the factions in Jerusalem. John of Giscala, who's not to be confused with John, our hero, and Simon. And I don't know if you understood, they talk about them taking over the temple area. Somebody mentioned that earlier. So we have the temple, and the temple has two areas. It has the Holy of Holies, where you can only go once a year. And then the front room that has the candlesticks and the bread that they lay out. Then in front of the temple, they've got a big basin for washing and an altar where all the sacrifices go. And then it's all enclosed with a courtyard. But that courtyard was enclosed with a courtyard. And then that courtyard was enclosed with a courtyard. This is not to scale. And so, the outer court is the court of the Gentiles. Non-Jews can't get any closer than this. Court of the women. Women can't get any closer than this. The men, Jewish men, can come in here and offer sacrifice. That, of course, only priests can go in the temple. But only one priest, the high priest, can go in there, and only once a year. Do you see how the closer you get, the fewer people can go in? So imagine, say again, Jesse? To do what? Well, you can only be a priest if you're a Levite. So if you belong to the other tribes, that is a goal you will never have. Only Levites for the tribe of Levi. Always the tribe of Levi. Levites didn't have any land. The offerings were their portion. So imagine the horror of good, God-fearing Jews when these factions come in. They're actually taking control of the various courts. Some of them taking control of the temple area itself in the temple and using it as a military fortress. It's horrifying. It's terrible. So, aside from all the horrible stuff that's going on in Jerusalem, just the fact that rebel bands of brigands, violent, are fighting and dying here. The sacrilege is incredible in a place where only certain people were supposed to go and only at certain times. Well, I don't know if anybody went in the Holy of Holies. These guys are Jews, John of Giscala and the rest of them. I don't know. But I want to talk about this because
Wait, but Jesus
yes.
Why did this? Because there's people
Oh yeah, but the majority of Jews did not.
Right, but why did it? So that technically you could just walk in and
I don't know. You just made up my mind. I'm going to talk my quotes, my Josephus quotes. I'm going to mix them up. Okay, so it says in the G.A. Hinty book that, gotta find my page. Hold on. This is at the moment when the Romans are finally, after 4 years, they're finally approaching the walls of Jerusalem. They come at last, Simon said, and as he spoke, cries of wailing and lamentation were heard from the walls far below them. The 4 years that had elapsed since danger first threatened Jerusalem had deepened the impression in the minds of the Jews that the enemy would not be permitted to approach the holy city. We thought it wouldn't happen. We thought God would save us. Like they did in the time of Hezekiah. The Assyrians came and camped around the city and they sent insulting letters to King Hezekiah. And they said insulting things about us. And Hezekiah prayed. And that night, the entire Assyrian army died. 180,000. They died. And so, what? The death angel. That's what it says. The angel of the Lord. The angel of the Lord struck them down. Look. Okay, if we have time, remind me. Byron's poem, The Destruction of Sennacherib. Awesome poem. No, I have a poem memorized about this event. If I'll tell you if we have time. Anyway, they're remembering that. It's like, God will save us. Yeah. Do you remember the time when the Babylonians came and knocked down the former temple and took a bunch of people captive, including Daniel and his 3 friends? You're not remembering that. Okay, so same paragraph. It was true that their faith had been sorely shaken by many strange prodigies. Now, this is the part I want to read to you out of Josephus. And my favorite prodigy, G.A. Hinty tells you, but I'm saving it to read it out of Josephus. Okay, listen to this. Numerous false prophets deluded the people at this time. They were hired by the tyrants to urge the people to wait for help from God, and so keep them from deserting. Before the siege, however, portents had appeared, foretelling the impending devastation. But the Jews had disregarded these warnings from God. A star which resembled a sword hung over the city, and also a comet which lasted a year. And just before the revolt, when the people were coming together for the feast of unleavened bread. Remember, why are there so many people at Jerusalem at this time? It's Passover. A bright light shone around the altar during the night and brightened the sanctuary for half an hour. The people thought this a good omen, but the scribes told them the contrary. The eastern gate of the inner court, which was fastened with iron bars and so heavy that it took 20 men to move it, flew open of its own accord during the night. And this is the one that G.A. Hinty mentions, and this is my favorite one. And at the feast of Pentecost, when the priests entered the inner court of the temple, they heard a great noise, and after that, the voices of a multitude. Are you with me, Rhett? Because this is the answer to your question. And they heard the voices of a multitude saying, "We are leaving this place." Now, Rhett's question is God still there? Is God's presence still there? This makes it sound, Josephus isn't scripture. We don't have any, we're speculating, okay, just so you know. Like I may be totally wrong on this. But Josephus makes it sound like there still was a presence there. We know one thing. We know that curtain that divided them got ripped in two when Jesus died. Opening it up, ripped from top to bottom, not bottom to top like human beings would do it. But they were still worshiping in the temple. They were still offering sacrifices, and they were still going into the Holy of Holies. And okay, Rhett, now here's totally Mrs. Ferguson's speculation, and utterly only mine. The Bible says God does not rejoice in the death of the sinner, but he wants us to repent. And I don't think he wanted this to happen to the Jewish people. And I don't know that he didn't, if it's not sacrilegious to say, hang around for a while at the temple, hoping that his people would understand who Jesus was, hoping they would come to their senses and come to him, and that they would stop the rebellion. I already told you, Jesus warned them this was going to happen. He said, when you see the armies surrounding the city, flee to the hills. And a lot of Christians did. It saved their lives. But perhaps at this moment, when the judgment's about to fall, I don't know, like isn't the right word. The idea is enchanting to me that at this moment, God with the heavenly host said, we're out of here. We gave you every chance to repent. It's not happening. We leave you now to the Romans, being God and his heavenly hosts. We leave you to the Romans. That's all my speculation, okay? I don't know. I mean, Josephus does report it. Does Josephus ever make anything up? I don't know. He has no reason to make this up, though, I feel like. So there were portents in Jerusalem that something really bad was going to happen. But yet everybody flocked in to Jerusalem, even though they had seen that the Romans kept taking other towns. The whole withstanding a siege thing never works. So Josephus tells us about the arrival of John of Giscala at Jerusalem. He says, John entered Jerusalem. He and the fugitives were surrounded by vast crowds, eagerly asking for outside news. The newcomers, still hot and gasping, put on a boastful air and said they had not fled from the Romans, but had come to defend the capital, thinking it reckless to risk their lives for defenseless little towns like Giscala. When, however, they mentioned the fall of Giscala, their hearers understood that their retreat meant flight and had a premonition of their own capture. John, however, went around inciting groups to war, portraying the Romans as weaklings, who, even if they had wings, could never clear the walls of Jerusalem. They'd already experienced difficulty in subduing the villages of Galilee, he claimed, and had worn out their engines against these walls. The young believed him and were incited to take up arms, but the old and prudent mourned over the future. Jerusalem was now divided into two hostile factions. All right, and it goes on. You've seen this portrayed in the book. So Matthew has brought up a really good question. How are these bands going to react when John shows up? Because it's John's intent that as soon as the temple is threatened, to go with his band and defend it. How are they going to take to a new guy who, for all they know, is like them? He just wants a piece of the action. I'm going to start strong-arming people and killing and murdering. I left out that section that I just left off. Josephus goes on to describe just mass murder. Just these bands just going around killing people, stealing their food, whatever. It's only going to get worse. One interesting thing, and then we'll do our Mad Lib. G.A. Henty says something that's really always good for us to remember when we read history. And it is this. When you read Josephus or anyone else, it's always good to ask yourself, who is this doing the writing? And do they have an agenda? Josephus is writing to defend himself against the Jews who think he's a dirty, rotten traitor who's gone over to the Romans, right? He has a reason to make himself sound good and his enemies sound bad. And if his was the only testimony we had, it would be kind of suspect. But listen to this. This is Simon, okay? I don't know if he's talking about Simon or John here, but one of the rebel leaders. As only his picture has come down to us, as described by the pen of Josephus, who at the time of his writing his history had become thoroughly a Roman, and who elevated Titus and his troops at the expense of his own countrymen. Great allowance must be made for the dark colors in which he is painted. Right? When you only have one person's description of someone in history and they're painted to be really, really bad, maybe they're telling the truth. Maybe that person was really, really bad. Maybe they have a reason for making them sound worse than they were. There's a famous British king, English king named Richard III, and they've argued, they used to think it was dirty, rotten scoundrel. Shakespeare wrote a play. He's monster in the play. And then later people said, maybe he wasn't such a monster. And historians flip-flop. Was he an evil person? Is he just misunderstood? Did his enemies write his history? Some of you may know, do you know who Edgar Allan Poe is? You know Edgar Allan Poe? We tend to think of him as a bit of a drunk, maybe more than a bit, and a little deranged. And it just so happens that he made his living off writing literary criticism, like reading books and doing book reviews, and he really slammed some guy. And the guy he slammed wrote the first obituary that made it into the papers after Poe died. And that picture of Edgar Allan Poe very likely was written by an enemy. I think he did drink, but I don't know if he was a complete I don't know how you're totally drunk all the time and write such amazing stuff. But anyway, point being, when your enemies write your history may or may not be true. Okay, finish for the temple this week. It sounds like things are pretty bad in Jerusalem, but I am just telling you it's going to get worse. It is going to get worse. And it is going to get worse. All right, as promised, because I knew we would go short, we will have some fun now. I need a pen, and you guys need to pull out your parts of speech. It's always good practice. Sometimes students think they know, and then when you say, give me an adjective, suddenly, they don't know. All right, we'll do one of these, and then I'll read you some of our modifiers that are horribly misplaced, leading to hilarious results. Okay, what are we going to do? Oh, okay, I like this one. All right, we're going to start with Matthias. Matthias, give me an adjective. What? Cool. All right. Dalton, give me another adjective. Don't? What? Pink. All right. Owen, a plural noun. Ella, another plural noun. It's a very animal-y one. Rhett, you get an adjective. Sharp. Matthew, a noun. Misintentions. Oh. Were you saving that one up? Were you saving that up since the beginning? That was awesome. Okay. Jesse, you have to compete with that. You also get a noun. What? What? Airfoils. Oh, okay. Okay, airfoil. These were just supposed to be a singular. All right. But Matthias gets a plural noun. All right, Dalton, another adjective from you. Sorry. Extravagant. Oh, I like it. Okay. Owen, the name of a person. What? Well, it says person in room, but does that offend anyone if they get used? Okay, go for it. Okay. All right, Ella, you get an adjective. Oh, and Rhett, a noun. This one has a lot of them. What? A hydro flask? Is that a thing? It doesn't say it has to be a real thing. Obviously, it's a noun. Okay. Matthew, adjective. Yeah. Sorry. What? Okay. And Jesse, a noun. Sorry. This is kind of it's got a lot of slots, but they're kind of boring things. Shh, let him think. Let him do his own. Fat cells. Wow. Okay, I'm reading. Okay. Matthias, plural noun. And Dalton, you have a plural noun. Owen, you have an adjective. Ella, you have an adjective. Rhett, you have an adjective. And that ends it. So you can be thinking. Okay, back to Matthias and his plural noun.
Bradley.
Carter. Okay. Okay, it's plural, so it's going to be Carters. Okay, Dalton, what's your plural noun? Ooh, okay. Your adjective, Owen? And Ella, your adjective? Rhett, do you have an adjective? Okay. And that finishes it. She's thinking. That's not an adjective. Just look at something in the room and describe it. Yes, but you both have an adjective. You're both, what? No, that's a possessive noun. What? What? Yeah, you could use it. Okay. I want to make it very clear this is not an adjective. I feel bad about putting an adjective over a line that says adjective. Okay, Rhett. Miniature? Okay, here we go. This is a political speech. Ladies and gentlemen, on this cool occasion, it is a privilege to address such a pink-looking group of dogs. I can tell from your smiling rabbits that you will support my sharp program in the coming election. I promise that if elected, there will be a misintention in every airfoil and 2 airplanes in every garage. I want to warn you against my extravagant opponent, Mr. Matthias. This man is nothing but a painful hydro flask. He has a fat character and is working fat cells in glove with the criminal element. Why is he so fat? If elected, I promise to eliminate vice. I will keep the Carters off the city streets. I will keep crooks from dipping their twin towers in the public till. I promise you smelly government, Matthews taxes, and miniature schools. All right, beautiful. All right, I have chosen some more. This is from the sequel book. Some more descriptive words and phrases that have been put in the wrong place in the sentence. So remember I told you how your ing opener, when you use an ing, then it has to describe what the subject of the sentence is doing. And if it doesn't, this is called a dangling participle. It's dangling out there, it's hanging out there, and it doesn't have a thing that it's attached to. But this can be done with other things. We could sometimes prepositional phrases, when put in the wrong place to describe the wrong thing, can give you unintentional and hilarious results. And everything I'm about to read to you made it into print somewhere. This was published somewhere in a newspaper or a church bulletin or something. So that you don't feel so bad, people do this. And enough people read these that they didn't notice that they were actually saying something rather odd when you thought about it. But it's now, we can laugh over it, but we all do it occasionally. Yes, Rhett, did you want to say something? Oh, yes. Okay. I circled the ones that I thought were best. Okay, let me see what time it is. All right. Now, sometimes, especially when you're hearing it and not reading it, you might not hear it immediately or notice it. Hopefully this one you will. During the summer, my sister and I milked the cows. But now that school has started, My father milks the cows in the morning and us at night. Okay, we all did get that. Apparently that was a good opener. I've won the audience to me. Okay. Mrs. McAllister watched as the giant airplane taxied out of the gate. Then, like some wild beast, she pointed her nose down the runway and screamed terrifically into the sky. They, of course, mean the airplane, not Mrs. McAllister. Mr. Yoshiko said, the donkey owners should clearly state why they want to keep the animals. If they cannot give good reasons why they need the donkeys, then they will be shot. This is another thing to be aware of. When you use a pronoun, and there's more than one thing the pronoun can apply to, you need to make sure your reader understands. The donkeys will be shot, not the donkey owners. It is my hope in the near future to show additional films on the hazards of cigarette smoking, nutrition, and dental care. This one's a little more subtle because what they've done is they've started a prepositional phrase, the hazards of cigarette smoking, and to make it parallel, it would then be the hazards of nutrition and the hazards of dental care. You can't do that. Okay, we have turned our cans into cash to use towards programs for our children rather than burying them in a landfill. It doesn't say. When he wrote the first book, he said people just started mailing him just everything they found that was crazy. For sale. Very unique home in downtown Craigsville. Large lot. Many trees. One you will enjoy living in. This is the problem. Recent visitors, you're going to love this one. Recent visitors were the Jonathan Goldings and their in-laws, the Brett Packards from Lake Placid, New York. Brett had his tonsils removed in Centerville. It was a pleasant surprise to have them for supper. Brett had his tonsils removed in Centerville. It was a pleasant surprise to have them for supper. I forgot to read that one yesterday. Okay, this one's a little more subtle. It says the intro says last line of a short story by a famous author. It does not say who the famous author is or what the short story is because it's a little embarrassing. But this is the last line. On the floor above him lived a red-headed instructor in physical education, whose muscular calves he admired when they nodded to each other by the mailbox. So he meant that he and the red-headed instructor nod to each other, but it sounds like her calves nod to each other. Whose muscular calves he admired when they nodded to each other by the mailbox. Okay. I haven't liked the food in any of the cafeterias I've eaten. Do you see? What did you eat in this sentence? Cafeterias. In any of the cafeterias I've eaten. A funeral ceremony can accumulate significant costs, such as cleaning the church and an organist. Sounds like they're cleaning the organist. Okay, this is a good one of our dangling modifiers. Although irregular, we will consider your request. You see, it's the same problem with our ing. Although irregular, we will consider your request. We are irregular, apparently, not the request. Oxbridge Church tries to assist in serving a luncheon for the families of church members who have died immediately following the funeral. It sounds like people are dying immediately following the funeral. They mean the luncheon is immediately following the funeral. I feel like you're going to like this one once you see it. A woman who started selling hot dogs clad in a bikini 2 weeks ago was denied a vendor's license at the town council meeting. A woman who started selling hot dogs clad in a bikini 2 weeks ago. Can you see the little hot dogs in their little tiny bikinis?
No, I
can see them. You can own a handcrafted etching in glass for a limited time only. Sounds like someone's going to come take it away from you eventually, doesn't it? She watched as her father returned home with the horses all dressed in cowboy attire. An oil spill was first reported to the Coast Guard in early May by a person who saw oil-covered rocks walking along the shore.
Oh, wow.
It's kind of a shock. The bride was given in marriage by her father, wearing a Victorian-style dress with a cathedral-length train.
Oh, wow.
That would be her father wearing it. He ran outside and chased after the cat with a broomstick in his underwear. So painful. Oh, still, it was delicious to sit near the well where a few trees had straggled and survived, gnawing on the salty stringing meat and drinking beer. We sat by where the trees had struggled and survived, gnawing on salty stringy meat and drinking beer. It sounds like the trees did that, gnawed on meat and drank beer. It means we did it. Okay, we have one more. No, we have two more. Hunters have gained the right to hunt deer in the Illinois Supreme Court. And the last one's kind of a letdown. We saw many bears driving through Yellowstone Park. All right, be careful with your prepositional phrases and your modifiers, because if you're not, I may have to send your paper into the writer of these books, and people will laugh at you. That's mean. We will laugh with you. Yes. If I do, absolutely. But you know what? The problem is none of these people knew. None of these people saw the unintentional humor in what they said, because we all know what we're thinking in our own heads. This is why proofreading is really great, but even these kind of escape proofreading, because you know what you meant. And it's really hard, but once you see the humor, it's very fun. Okay, finish for the temple, start the paper, do the portions that I said, and read out of the next chapter of Dorothy Mills, the sections that I outlined in your reading guide. Have a good weekend, and we'll see you next time.